Well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here with you at Cybersec for this Fireside chat. It's a bit early in the day, especially for Eric, to be having a Fireside chat, and I'm sure we haven't got a glass of whiskey, maybe a cup of coffee. But it's a very important subject, and I'm very glad that we've got here the leadership of the two frontline cybersecurity agencies to discuss some of these issues. We're tight for time, so we're going to keep it very sharp. I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'm going to invite each in turn to address them. You've been hearing during the course of the day about the shifting threat landscape against which we need to build this cooperation. We haven't really got time to analyze that, but I just wanted to ask each of you, because you're on the front line, very briefly, when you're thinking about the threat, what keeps you awake at night? Perhaps Juhan to start.
Thanks very much, Sir Julian, for this great introduction. I wouldn't mind to have a fire because unceremoniously we have a winter now in Athens and it's snowing outside, so it would be nice. I'm a sound sleeper, so nothing really keeps me awake at night. But what I worry about, I think, is the perception that bad cybersecurity is like bad weather. You can't do anything about it. And I think this is a perception that we need to fight against because cybersecurity is something that we can change. The overall level of cybersecurity in transatlantic environment is something that we can tackle, not only in terms of understanding better the threats, but also what can we do in order to raise our resilience? What can we do in order to build a much more threat-adverse economic space, and how we can manage our infrastructure in a way that makes them more cyber resilient. So these things, I think, are something worth fighting for on both shores of the Atlantic.
Eric?
Great. Well, again, Sir Julian, such a pleasure to be here. I have young kids at home, so I don't sleep much anyway. But, when I think about the most concerning trends in the cyber threat environment, over the past year, we've really seen cyber risk become a kitchen table issue, certainly in America, and I believe across Europe as well. We have seen cyber intrusions really for the first time have impacts that affect everyday people going about their lives, supporting their families and their communities. And so what is really most concerning is this trend where we are seeing cybersecurity risk disrupt what we at CISA call national critical functions, those services upon which families, communities, and businesses depend every day, whether it is energy, the financial system, healthcare. Really, we know now that every organization's services are most at risk. And so as my co-panelists noted, I think perfectly correctly, the focus needs to be not only in driving adoption of better security controls, but also focusing on resilience so that we know and have some assurance that these critical functions remain viable under all conditions, even when subject to a damaging cyber intrusion.
So that's the challenge you described, both of you. As key agencies that are driving the response to this challenge, what do you see, and how are you working with key partners, whether that's across the administrations, in government, with regulators who obviously are playing an increasing role in this field, and of course with partners in industry. So how's that going? Perhaps this time, Eric, you want to kick off?
It's a fantastic question, and I will continue a theme from the prior panel, which is the focus needs to be on collaboration. Government doesn't run the vast majority of the networks upon which all people depend. And so the only way that we'll be successful and if we'll move at the speed of our adversaries is if we are collaborating at an operational level side by side with our international partners and our private sector partners who actually are able to act with urgency to protect against the emerging threats that we're seeing. Now at CISA, we recently stood up a new construct that we call the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or JCDC. And that's really now our focal point to bring together at the operational level big technology companies, cybersecurity companies, increasingly partners across critical infrastructure, as well as partners across the U.S. government, and our colleagues internationally, particularly our core partners in international certs, to make sure that for urgent events, like, of course, the recent vulnerabilities in the Log4j library, that we are working side by side, day in and day out, to move more quickly, get more visibility, and remediate threats before they cause harm.
That sounds great. Juhan, does that sound familiar? How's it look from your perspective with a different set of actors?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when we look at the US environment or EU environment, it remains different also in terms of the regulatory premise which is put in place. But I think what we have is a bit of a similar understanding that there are a lot of actors that need to synchronize their actions in order to respond to these threats. There is a lot we can do when it comes to coordination, cooperation, but one of the things that I think is kind of a first step is building a common understanding of what are the goals, what are the objectives, what we want to reach. Because no amount of coordination in the end of the day can make certain that everybody in the community, not only the public sector, but also the private sector at different levels, on the national level, on the EU level, will take the steps what are necessary. But shared goals, shared objectives, I think, are the main key factors that drive this. And within the European context, of course, the Commission has put on the table the new cybersecurity strategy, which entails the framework or the concept of the joint cyber unit, building a better situational awareness amongst the member states and the EU actors, having a framework that also incorporates private sector actors through the cyber shield. So I think in one side of the Atlantic, on the other side of the Atlantic, we take very similar steps to ensure that we have a coordinated framework in place. And across the Atlantic, I think we also need to look at what are the steps that we can take in order to enhance this dialogue regarding our objectives so that we understand it in a similar fashion. And I think there are steps that we need to take and should take when it comes to having a better understanding of the threats, better common awareness, and also we can coordinate our activities when it comes to building resilience on both sides.
Juhan, you mentioned regulation, which is increasingly a feature of this area. In fact, on both sides of the Atlantic. Do you both feel that when regulators are doing their work, that they're taking cybersecurity sufficiently seriously? Now, obviously, there are some pieces of legislation and regulation that are coming in that are focused on cybersecurity and building up critical infrastructure. But there's a whole lot of other regulation that affects tech. Some of it's being discussed in the Trade and Tech Council, indeed. And I just wanted to ask each of you how involved you feel cybersecurity experts, your agencies, are in thinking about how to mainstream cybersecurity when wider regulation on tech is being developed. I don't know whether, Juhan, you want to have a first go at that?
Well, I can say that cybersecurity is not only a matter which is now discussed in all families around the kitchen table, but it's also a matter that is discussed across all different policy domains. And we see that in Europe happening at the EU level, where, for example, the deliberations on the recent review of financial regulation also included deliberation on how to make the financial sector more cyber secure. So there are a lot of discussions going on, and cybersecurity is an essential element that is discussed in these policy deliberations. The key fact, of course, is that how do we make sure that there is a certain common level of understanding what is the minimum requirement that all critical sectors need to follow. In Europe, the best tool for this is the Network Information Security Directive, which is also now being reviewed. And I think there are a number of elements which now have entered into this stage. Cybersecurity, as you say, is a relatively new domain, but it has become more mature. So pursuing a regulatory approach in order to address some of these key concerns seems quite logical from the point of view of the legislators, but also from the point of view of the implementers. I think we need to have a better regulatory environment in order to have a better cybersecurity.
So I'm sure that's right. So on a big piece of legislation or regulation like the Digital Markets Act, people come to you, Juhan, and ask you for your advice.
Indeed, though I think we also need to choose which is the best tool in order to address the specific problem. Is cybersecurity an issue of the digital markets, or is it something that is underlying it? So, and of course, that is also a choice of the regulator. But we are in constant dialogue with the legislators in order to advise and assist them in their pursuit of building a better and more cybersecure Europe.
Eric, do you have the same kind of dialogue?
Largely so. CISA is not a cybersecurity regulator, and so our role is really to be those technical experts to help all organizations, including regulators, assess what are the right requirements to impose to achieve the security outcomes that we're seeking. But we really do operate much more significantly in that voluntary partnership space. One example of the alignment between our voluntary model and the development of thoughtful requirements in various fora is our work to develop cybersecurity performance goals. Now, President Biden issued a memorandum earlier this year that required CISA and our partners, including the private sector, to develop voluntary performance goals across critical sectors that will provide some baseline expectations for if you're an organization trying to evaluate the maturity of your cybersecurity program, where can you start in a way that will be aligned and common across organizations in your sector and indeed across multiple sectors more broadly. Now, these performance goals are wholly voluntary and not intended for use in regulation, but an example of CISA working with the private sector to really establish what do we think good cybersecurity looks like and how do you measure your progress there too.
That sounds great. Now, you're each leading the debate with your respective partners, but we're also meant to be talking about hands across the ocean. How are you learning from each other, and what steps have you taken to work in lockstep against these challenges? Eric, how do you find the relationship?
Absolutely. One of the most important roles that CISA has is as America's CERT. And I can't overstate the operational impact, relevance of our collaboration with our global computer emergency response teams, or CERTs, day in and day out. And our teams are in constant dialogue with our fellow CERTs in Europe and elsewhere to ensure that we have shared visibility into threats that are manifesting across our network, the impact of vulnerabilities on our governments, on companies in our jurisdictions, and that we are also working together to build the capacity of the international CERT community so that all like-minded countries have the capability to effectively manage and respond to cyber threats within their jurisdictions, and also to share information most effectively with this operational CERT community, which really is so critical given the common threats that many of us face every day.
Juhan, how is the relationship going, and what are you learning from each other?
Yeah, well, I think what Eric said is something that we also try to emulate at the European level. So we have a network of European CERTs, and I think building better contacts between this network and CISA, the American counterparts, is something that we would like to undertake. And we've taken a few steps already. In the beginning of the pandemic, we had a good call with CISA regarding what are the different approaches that we should keep in mind, what they are doing and what we are doing. I think it's also, we've seen that in a number of cyber events that have occurred, that the coordination between CISA and the European CERTs is something that is very valuable, especially when it comes to understanding the information that private sector can give to the CERT in order to respond to any new vulnerabilities or threats that are outlined. So this kind of a practical cooperation must take place, and also I hope that in the future will evolve and be more structured.
And do you see the Trade and Tech Council as a framework, a useful framework for trying to increase this learning from each other on cybersecurity issues, and indeed in mainstreaming again cybersecurity considerations into policy making on secure supply chains, or how to achieve greater connectivity while still being secure? I don't know, Eric, how you find your input to that wider debate.
Certainly, moving more generally to ensure that we have global alignment around progress toward an open, free, and secure internet, I think is a goal that we all share. And so any forum that collectively helps us advance that conversation and coalesce around shared expectations for the global community to ensure that as technology evolves, it is used in a way that, again, supports openness, freedom, and security. I think that's the goal that we are working to advance at CISA with our partners.
Juhan?
Well, I certainly hope that TGC can provide a kind of a good platform for dialogue. Eric mentioned the performance indicators that they're developing together with the private sector. ENISA, of course, is now developing together with the private sector as well number of certification frameworks. Essentially, the goals are very similar, to have a kind of a checklist that the private sector can follow in order to not only assure itself, but also its clients that they've taken all necessary steps in order to build more resilient services and products. So I think there to have a better understanding of how these performance indicators work in the US, or how the certification will work in Europe, I think the TGC could be a very useful platform.
Now, you've both played the game fantastically well. You've been very tight in your answers, and so we're more or less on time. We've just got a moment for one last thought from each of you, which again, we started with nightmares. Let's finish with dreams. If you were pitching now to one of the budget holders or a political leader who has a big interest in the future of cybersecurity, what would be your top 2 or 3 asks for developing the role of cybersecurity and the role of your agency in driving that debate? Eric, do you want to have first go on the wish list?
Certainly, very glad to. One truism around cybersecurity today is we spend a tremendous amount of our time responding to and managing the latest threat, the latest vulnerability that is just an emergency facing network defenders across the globe. But we also know at the same time, we have to look over the horizon and take urgent steps to build a technology ecosystem that's more secure by design, where the balance favors the defenders over the attackers. And so at CISA, we are extremely focused on working with the technology community and our international partners to move to a world where technology is designed, built, and used more securely and more resiliently by design, including focusing on aspects like software security, like advancing adoption of software bill of materials so organizations know what is running on their network and can manage it more effectively, and more generally, so that we have more assurance as a community about the security of our technology that is running such critical functions on which we all depend.
Juhan? Obviously more money, but what else? What else do they need?
2 wishes, indeed. I mean, my first one would have been for investments. So invest today in order to make sure that you do not have to bear the consequences tomorrow. But I think the balance of responsibility, this is something that Eric also mentioned in a different context. But I think too much responsibility has been built on the users of not only the critical infrastructure, but everyday connected objects. And I think time has ripened, and cybersecurity is not anymore a novel area. So in a much more mature environment, we need to see whether the balance has been struck in the right place, and whether we need more responsibility from different actors in order to build a more cyber resilient ecosystem of the future. Technology is changing very rapidly. It is impossible for us to predict what will wait around the corner. But I think we need to make sure that all actors that deal with this, they bear the responsibility of stress testing their products and services, so that we have cybersecurity by default and cybersecurity by design. So far, these are only words, but I think we need to see action to make them real.
Listen, thank you both. I think it's really important on behalf of those who are involved in Cybersec, but more generally those who follow this debate around cybersecurity, to recognize the role, including the leadership role, that your agencies are giving. You are on the front line. You are a vital source of expertise and experience to help others, be they government, regulators, business, to deal with these challenges. And I just want to take the last minute to say thank you to both of you and to your teams for the work that you're doing. I'm sitting here in the sunshine, but you've shone a light on some very important subjects. And I'm going to hand back now to our hosts.